legal services, communications, welcome the media, and welcome the public at large. Then let's move to roll call and of attendance and apologies. Any apology?
Chair, Mr. Vessels and Mr. Sarupan sent your apologies.
Okay, those are the two apologies. And then let's move to item 3. Briefing by the National Treasury on their quarterly report. I'm not sure, DG, if the Deputy Minister is here. I don't see him. If he's not here, over to you. DG, are you there?
Yes, not sure I'm here. I'm here.
You have the Deputy Minister on the platform?
No, he was supposed to be here, and I'm just wondering, but his office, I guess, is checking because I see they're on the room, but we can start. We are fine. We are ready to go.
Call him so that we don't have political issues in your office. Let me give you 2 minutes to call him.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, otherwise, what are we now in your minister by default?
But we can start, Chair.
Okay.
We can start if that's fine with you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, Chair. Thank you very much. I mean, we are here on Q4 reporting, and not the easiest, as one can imagine, because we achieved almost 87% of our Q4 indicators. And key of which include measures to accelerate economic growth, and that's what we've been doing. And we also were aiming at tackling constraints and restore confidence and public trust. And the other one was about safeguarding the fiscal framework, monitoring and analyzing public expenditure, as well as managing public future spending growth and fiscal risk. The main thing that, Chair, we do, as you may be aware, is to coordinate fiscal relations between three spheres. The challenges remain in ensuring that we build and repair financial management and service delivery in municipalities. That's been, in this quarter, has been a daunting task. And as we all know that we've got in excess of 40 municipalities under distress, about 170 or so municipalities under financial challenges of some kind. So that has been there's about 3 municipalities where the courts have ruled that we should immediately intervene, and we've got national representatives there currently, and the latest that we installed was in Queenstown and in Gijima municipality 2 weeks ago. So there are those challenges that we've been dealing with, but however, it remains on our radar screen. Conducting research into strategic plans and areas of economy to better inform the implementation of economic policy remains also an important area and things that we've been doing. Managing government's annual funding program and government's financial systems hasn't been a challenge, and you'll hear us later, and obviously we're still looking forward to that visit, Chair, on that you promised us, and then around visiting us to actually engage further and deeper into the performance of the IFMS program, and we'll obviously be ready to engage the committee on that. Overseeing and improving government supply chain management remains a challenge, as is, but however, with the court ruling recently, I mean 2 or so months ago, and the whole issue around how we are managing this area was quite challenging and important, and we remain steadfast in ensuring that our supply chain management is in line. Supporting infrastructure development and economic integrated cities and communities remain key. This is a program, we've got a very elaborate city support program in our radar. We do that, we are engaged with that. But I think it's important, Chair, that we highlight this to the committee in line with our own performance. I have, Chair, as usual, our Chief Director and Head of my office, Laura Ramsey, who's responsible for performance monitoring and evaluation. She's quite critical in assessing and in helping the performance of different 10 units in the Treasury. And so she's ready to present, Chair, with your permission, and take you through various steps that are critical in ensuring that we report and we account properly on our annual performance plan. Laura is here, Chair, and she will take us through a few slides that we can engage on. Thank you very much. And again, apologies for the Deputy Minister, and because we are rushing, I didn't even give a chance, Chair, to greet everybody, all the members, honorable members who are here. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity once more to engage with you on our annual report, annual report and performance report. Thank you very much. Laura, please.
Good morning, committee, and good morning, Chair. Thank you very much, DG. Chair, I'll go directly into the performance for Q4. As the committee will have seen, we achieved 86.96% of our indicators of what was of concern for us, and we are pleased to see that we have reduced the underperformance, especially that performance which is determined below 50%. We reduced it from 6.98% in the previous quarter down to 4.35%. It's our view that in moving up to our annual performance report, we will still be able to address the partially performed, which is currently at 8.69%. And we are confident that at the end of our financial year, we would have achieved more than 80% of our indicators. Specifically in terms of the different divisions, 8 of our divisions achieved above 100%. The Office of the Accountant General only achieved 57%, and I'll indicate which indicators we underperformed there. But a number of indicators, committee, for the Office of the Accountant General, as well as the one indicator that public finance did not achieve, is due to delays in input information. Now, I know we speak to the committee each time we present on this, but it is important for National Treasury to monitor indicators that are value chain indicators. In other words, we are not completely in control of the entire process, but we are a key part of the process, and therefore those indicators are measuring our response time and our transaction time. Obviously, the downside of that is if the inputs into our value chain are delayed, then it results in a delay in our performance. However, the team then measures the extent to which our divisions respond to delays from other departments or outside entities, and that's an important part of the work that we do. In terms of total numbers, we achieved 40% of our indicators. We partially achieved 4. We realized that for the committees, as we move to the end of the year, that we give a combined not achieved because we don't roll indicators over from year to year. So our combined not achieved is 13%, just over 13%. But we do still track partially achieved because we have a very stringent process to monitor performance against budget, against expenditure. So partially achieved was 4 and not achieved was 2. For program 1, which is our administration, we achieved 100%. ICT remains a key focus for National Treasury, not only because of the recent hybrid model of working, although Treasury is moving towards a full return to work, but because much of the work that Treasury does is highly reliant on ICT, and the future priority work that we're doing around the OCPO, for example, is around automation and modernizing of systems, which equally are reliant on IT. Our risk management maturity levels achieved the planned 3.5%. If the committee will remember, this was a key priority for us this year. We have had challenges in terms of risk, and the organization has done significant work, both in terms of governance and operations, to raise risk within the culture of Treasury. We also produced the implementation of the action plan on our gender mainstreaming, and the special committee that the DG set up to deal with gender matters to ensure that the organization is culturally, organizationally, and in terms of policies and actions, understands and is aware of gender matters is producing great fruit. In terms of program 2, which includes economic policy, tax, financial regulation, and research, we have now published the 50 papers through the SA Tide program. These are available on our website. Financial sector legislation has been submitted for tabling in Parliament. The economic forecast has been developed, and the research output related to the macroeconomic policy review and microeconomic reform agenda have been produced as we had intended. Program 3, we achieved 77.78% of our indicators. This relates to our Budget Office, Public Finance, and IGR. Significant achievements were reached in terms of reforms introduced. 30 catalytic projects were approved in spatially targeted with regards to metropolitan cities, secondary cities, and rural towns. This was well above the planned 5. This is a particular focus of National Treasury, and you will see that it will be a priority focus in terms of intergovernmental relations and development of economic activity within local governments. Our partially achieved was in terms of 96% of cabinet memos received were commented on. This was below the planned 100%. Unfortunately, in terms of this, 2 cabinet memos were received from other departments on the day they were due for submission. And so that is why we underperformed there. However, Cabinet has noted departments' non-adherence to the guidelines for drafting of Cabinet memorandum, and specifically in respect of the distribution of these memorandum, the relevant ministers and cabinet secretaries have been requested to address matter so that public finance does not underperform. In terms of our technical advisors placed, this is part of the MFIB program. This is very much a time-bound related underperformance. 5 terminations were received during quarter 3 and quarter 4. This is a natural attrition in this program where our technical advisors sign as they get close to the end of their contract. They then indicate that whether they would not want to renew their contract. The MFIB program has been reviewed by National Treasury and significant recommendations have been put forward, which has been accepted by the DGs of recognizing the importance of program, where performance has not been as intense as we would have wanted it, and we have now implemented significant additional controls and supports in order to address and ensure that the important work that this program does has a greater footprint in terms of number of municipalities assisted, equally the type of assistance we provide, but most importantly to ensure that the municipalities own the assistance and are able to then sustain the assistance after the program moves on to a different municipality. There was underperformance in terms of the jobs fund. We did not disperse the amount that we had initially intended. This was mainly due to just to remind the committee, the jobs fund will not distribute funding unless the equal funding, the grant funding is provided by the recipient. In the absence of the recipient having placed the funding as initially agreed, no grant funding is dispersed. So given the economic growth, the lower growth exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic and civil unrest, there were a number of beneficiaries that were not able to provide their component of the funding, and therefore the grant funding was not dispersed. Also, we have a number of agricultural projects in this area, and due to challenges at the land bank, Jobs Fund had to delay disbursement because the land bank is the partner to the Jobs Fund in these important agricultural projects. And because they could not match the funding commitments, disbursements were delayed. There are significant controls that have been put in place by the Jobs Fund in terms of performance monitoring and tracking. They have a framework in place. They conduct project site visits. They conduct quarterly project implementation review meetings, and dispersed funding is tightly managed. Funds are only released when performance targets and project conditions are met. So whilst there is an underperformance technically in the Jobs Fund, this is because of the stringent controls, which is a very important part of the good governance of the Jobs Fund. Program for Assets and Liability Management, they achieved all of the indicators in this quarter, and noting that they have had capacity constraints, and despite these, they managed to achieve all of the indicators in this quarter. Program 5, this year we had a non-performance. In other words, we did not achieve below, we achieved below our 50%. Program 5 includes OCPO and OAP. And whilst important performance indicators were achieved, including the capacity development programs that have been implemented, the transversal systems that were available, the SCM directives that were approved, supporting the implementation plans on institutions in order to improve SCM performance. Unfortunately, a number of norms and standards developed. We had planned on 2, and neither of these were delivered. Now, this is a technical and structural underperformance. This indicator has been re-articulated in our new APP. And that is because we only develop norms and standards in response to issues raised by PFMA and MFMA compliance institutions on the existing legislative framework. And that then triggers our developing of norms and standards. In the absence of such a request, no norms and standards are required, and therefore none are developed. However, based on previous trends, we had given a number of 2, as opposed to how we've re-articulated this indicator, which is a percentage response to requests. So this underperformance is in fact a structural underperformance rather than a a poor performance. Program 6, if I could go back to IFMS, apologies. One of our underperformances in Program 5 equally is if I can just go back, apologies, committee, is also the IFMS. Now, IFMS, the key catalyst for the delivery planned in IFMS for this year was the appointment of the service provider, who will then develop the generic templates that would be implemented in the 2 pilot sites at national departments and 2 pilot sites in provinces. The procurement process was managed under the auspices of CETA, as it's a IT procurement. The procurement process did take place as we had planned, and therefore that was not an underachievement, that was a full achievement. Treasury did all processes to approve the procurement process as efficiently as we could, so that we could then get a service provider appointed as soon as possible. Unfortunately, at the end of the procurement process, the bid amounts far exceeded the budget, and it was not therefore possible for Treasury to appoint a service provider. It would have been irregular if we had. So although we had done everything we could to ensure that the service provider was appointed due to the bid price, we were not able to. However, Treasury did not simply accept the fact that we therefore would not be able to perform in the generic templates. We engaged, and in terms of government, there are resources that are available, particularly at provincial level, that will be able to assist us with the development of components of the IFMS system, and in particular our recruitment. And we wish to thank Western Cape government for assisting. We have now an agreement whereby we are utilizing the resources. The recruitment module, which is part of IFMS, is being implemented, is being developed for implementation and rollout. And whilst this is happening, the steering committee is considering alternative methodologies for implementation, given the price challenge. Program 6.
Laura, sorry, Laura. On that note, I think you must also mention the approach we received from the KZN government, Department of Transport, in using some of the modules, Oracle-based modules, so that they're able to interface. But that's something that's under consideration. Thank you. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you, DG. So as DG has indicated, what we are doing is applying as many measures as we can to ensure that IFMS is implemented rather than of implementation. Equally, where departments and provinces have licenses to be used for IFMS-related activities, i.e. in the financial areas, HR, performance, supply chain, we are consolidating those licenses under the single IFMS license. So Treasury is applying many streams to address the performance of IFMS. Program 6 achieved all of the indicators, as did Program 7, reminding the committee that Program 7, in terms of our APP, looks specifically at the SLA between Treasury and JEPA, and not all of JEPA's measurements, as they have their own APP. Capital, our vacancy rate is 13.77%. Remembering that Treasury uses an expanded vacancy rate, which includes long-term contract as well as internships as part of our vacancy rate. Our staff complement currently is 1,065. of which 89% are in terms of demographics, 89% are Black, 59% are female, and 1.13% are persons with disabilities. We continue to focus on increasing our staff complement in terms of persons with disabilities. A total of 44 promotions are made. As the committee will know, Treasury has a very active program within Treasury to promote internally, and in this we ensure that as employees move up through the system of Treasury, they are inculcated into the culture and the skills, wide skills, capacity, and experience required to be part of the Treasury SMS cohorts. 98% of SMS's members entered into performance agreements, and those who do not sign will not be eligible for performance rewards. And 29% of our employees participated in skills development and leadership programs. This is a key priority for us internally to increase this percentage, and it has been agreed that it will now be part of our unit of measures of divisions at our annual performance review, because it's imperative, given the nature of work that Treasury does, that we allow our employees to continuously update their skills, but equally to ensure at the front end of the curve on our area of expertise. We have had challenges with this, particularly during COVID. A number of our training programs that we had already indicated we'd participate in were either rescheduled or had changed in nature. In terms of our financial performance for Q4, there we had a slight overspend, but however, this will regulate itself through the year, and we are confident, given our spend in Q1, 2, and 3, that as has been the practice and norm historically, Treasury will spend the majority of our budget. In terms of under or overspend, there is an underspend of 10.3 million. It has been reduced, as the committee would have seen from our previous presentations. This is due to vacant positions, but as the committee will know, that Treasury has been filling our vacant positions, and we will be pleased to know that in terms of the current key vacancies, that 2 of the DDG positions, the recruitment process is completed, and they are currently, the cabinet memos at DPSA for consideration, and we're expecting it to be placed for cabinet approval shortly. We had underspending in terms of goods and services, in terms of the consulting services on the Municipal Revenue Management Improvement Program. These have been delays in terms of the initiation of the tender process. However, that has been resolved, and we're expecting this program to be reaching its budget and performance milestones. I've explained the IFMS delay. It is simply not possible for Treasury, and would have been it would have been incorrect for Treasury to appoint a service provider who was charging us more than we actually had budgeted for. And then in terms of OCPO, there's been some underspend in terms of their consulting services, and some of that has been deferred to 2022-23. And this has been due to delays in commencement of project, mainly around supply chain matters, but these have been resolved. In terms of transfers and subsidies, there was an overspend. This is in terms of the Neighbourhood Development Partnership grant transfers to the city in terms of the employment program window, partially offset, as we've indicated, with the payments on Secret Service, which was paid earlier in November. So the underspend in Q4 effectively has been equalized across the year. We had an overspend in payments of capital assets. This was mainly in terms of the procurement of network LAN within the ICT unit. This project was earlier. It was projected for earlier, but it was only processed in March 2022 due to the global delays in delivery of goods relating to ICT. Also payments of financial assets, there was a small underspend. This relates to the land bank, and the committee is well aware of matters around land bank. Equally, the 400 million that was underspent by land bank was partially offset by the overspend in terms of the development bank's 7th capital installments. And so given these balancings between overspend and underspend, Treasury is confident that by the end of the financial year, well, as of the financial end of the year, we have paid within our budget. This is just to indicate, as the committee knows, that by far the majority of National Treasury's budget is in terms of payments of financial assets, as well as transfers and subsidies, and the rest is 2% goes to goods and services, and only 1% is for compensation of employees. Thank you very much to the committee, and I'll hand back to you, DG. Thank you, DG.
Chair, thank you very much. Our presentation ends here, and we are more than happy to engage the committee. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks, DG and your team. Honorable members, that's the presentation. Clarity, seeking questions, comments. Dr. George, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the report. My understanding is that the National Treasury is responsible to oversee the management of the public finances. Now, this is a very broad responsibility given the amount of money in the public financial system. We do, however, know and see very clearly that there is massive leakage and irregular spending and fruitless and wasteful expenditure of the people's money. Now, you have scored yourselves highly on public finance and budget management, yet we have this problem with what I've just mentioned in terms of the leakages and irregular expenditure, etc. I do understand that there's obviously a wide network responsibilities across government, given the large amounts of money. But my understanding, as I said, is that Treasury is in fact responsible ultimately for the effective application of that money and the oversight thereof and the consequences if it isn't done. And I don't see anywhere there how that is actually measured, because in my view is that if we were to look at the state of the public finances and how money that gets then, for example, given to the state-owned enterprises, for example, the people's money that comes from Treasury and that doesn't get where it's supposed to get, for example, how does Treasury measure that, and how does Treasury manage its performance on that? Because that buck must certainly stop somewhere, in my opinion, and I think that it stops with the Treasury.
Thanks, Dr. George. Honorable Mrolo.
Well, thank you very much, Chairperson, and sorry for my connectivity issues. Chairperson, let me thank the DG and his team for a comprehensive presentation on the annual performance. The Jobs Fund, in my view, is a very beautiful concept. The only concern we will always have is when it is unable to fulfill the purpose for which it was created. I'm worried that there has been no disbursement in the past financial year. And I'm not suggesting that the concept itself must be repurposed. My concern is that should the situation persist, what becomes of this beautiful concept called the Jobs Fund? And if the team can also indicate whether what has been the trajectory of disbursement in the last 2 to 3 years, so that we are reminded of the performance of the Jobs Fund in the past years, juxtaposing it with its inability to reach its target in the past financial year. Thanks.
Thanks, Honorable Mulolo. Honorable Abraham.
Yes, Chair, thank you so much. Chair, my take is on municipalities, and I think there's even the former minister had announced that he had also been allocated as mayor of one of the dysfunctional municipalities. My question is whether before the municipalities fail dismally, is there assistance from National Treasury that these municipalities are able to access? Secondly, with so many municipalities in distress, is that not draining the brain of National Treasury? Is National Treasury coping with so many municipalities that are in distress? And if I may, what could be the long-term solution to this problem?
Thanks, Honorable Abraham. Just a question from my side. I see here, DG, just a minute. Just disappeared. Okay. 98% of SMS members entered into a performance agreement. And there are those who did not sign. And if SMS, I'm not sure, SMS start from a director, hopefully upward until to the DG. Is it optional to sign an agreement, a performance agreement? If you don't, you won't get a performance bonus. But I thought if you are an SMS, it's mandatory that you should enter into a performance agreement with the DG or the accounting officer. 2, the IFMS, this is an albatross, and you have extended the contract. I hear you now, there's Western Cape coming to do this, KwaZulu-Natal, and what can you give us the rationale of extending a contract of a system which is not performing? Just explain in simple terms, 300 million that we're talking about. Why? Tell the public, why are you doing that? And then lastly, how far are you with the AfriForum case where they took government to court in regard to triple PFA? because I know the tenders are still issued out. But what is government doing to make sure that the wheel of change in terms of transformation and bringing Black people into the mainstream of economy is not stopped by the right wingers? Because this government is not neutral. It has got the responsibility to affirm women, affirm Black women who were oppressed, affirm Blacks and Africans in general. It must be very clear that we are not a neutral state. This government came into being in 1994 with a clear mission. And any right-wing tendencies should be dealt with. So how far are you to make sure that BBEE is not taken off the radar of government? And this department, Treasury, which is responsible for putting in place a national legislation dealing with procurement, is responsible to make sure that things are done right and this matter of AfriForum be dealt with. We can't allow a government which gets intimidated by structures which have not been elected. It can't be. You are a government and you must have teeth and be in defense of the majority. You can't put the interest of the minority.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I totally agree with you on the last point, starting with you, that I think it's a matter that we, the principles underpinning the Constitution is what should inform us in how we engage or approach litigation, and also, brief our lawyers in a way that we have to. No doubt. And I agree with you that right-wing tendencies should be dealt with when they show their ugly neck, and this is informed by our history. So coming from that thinking and understanding, we obviously recognize the independence of the courts. We recognize the processes that the court has put in place, and we have to abide by those, which then is different in terms of arguing these matters if we have to, because those will argue without fear or favor. But the issue here is a process issue, whereby we did, file an affidavit seeking clarity with the courts, so that, because the court was not very clear. And what we cannot do is to keep on, you know how the court system functions, Chair. I mean, I always say to our lawyers, can't you just call and check? He says, look, court processes are on their own. We have filed our affidavit. We are waiting for the court to rule, and to the clarity that we are seeking for it to be very clear, so that we know what we are attacking, what we are dealing with, and what we will be defending. So that process is ongoing until such time that the court comes back to us, Chair. We'll have to wait. But what we did not do was to stop procurement. What we did not do, we did put measures in place for procurement to continue in the way that is continuing, obviously without flouting what the court ruled as unlawful. So there's also an issue which I must clear now, Chair, that says Treasury has stopped tenders. No. We have not stopped tenders. I think the two letters that we wrote in February and March, the first one was very clear, because we had to act fast, so that, lawful, this was on the 25th of March, but, 3rd of, April, we had confirmed and specified and clarified that procurement process should continue. So there shouldn't be any confusion. Procurement is ongoing and it should not be stopped. So no National Treasury has stopped procurement from continuing. Laura will talk to the IFMS process, but Chair, with respect, Chair, to the issue as you raise it, and that's why we were welcoming, in my opening remarks, I said we were looking forward and welcoming the thorough and deep on IFMS, to explain what IFMS is. And clear, Chair, there is a total misunderstanding and from what IFMS is, and including, Chair, the question that you raised demonstrates that there may maybe be some misunderstanding even from your side, Chair, as to whether this is just a contract that was extended or not. There's no contract, that is just IFMS. What is there? You've got a program that was started many years ago, aiming at integrating financial management systems of government. That's why it is IFMS. You've got BEPS, you've got Logis, you've got PERSAL, you've got all of these legacy systems, as we call them, which, by the way, we still manage, and we have to manage them parallel, which makes it more complicated, parallel within the rollout and the implementation. Now, Chair, we still would prefer that the committee, we engage with the committee on the origins of IFMS, the spending, the program to date, and the implementation. Now, there are licenses that we bought some years ago, 2016, I think, 2015, 2016. We chose Oracle to be the system behind IFMS. And we paid for licenses. Now, the issue that has always been with us, and it comes every time the annual report is engaged with from the AG on the fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and then we've been disputing it even today. There's an issue about the material irregularity, obviously, that is there, that we're engaging with the AG. And if need be, obviously, this matter is going to be too complicated, and we are not just leaving it. But Chair, I'm pleading with the committee, but I know the committee is coming through to see us at some point, to explain that our program is and why we are encouraged, because currently in the system, as an example, there are many departments and many organs of state that are using Oracle in their own small systems. And this has been even long before IFMS. So what we've been saying is that because we bought these licenses, we are looking at each and every license agreement and what we have, and make sure that those licenses that have been used, because it's one government, you cannot have Oracle having a contract with some department in Gauteng, and then we've got these licenses that are not being used. So they must piggyback on this license, and that's the onward engagement that we have with Oracle. And so even on that day when we meet here, we'll make letters available between us and Oracle, the fight that we had trying to change what essentially is seen as fruitless and wasteful expenditure, including now what we have to do, organs of state, in this case, the Western Cape, KZN, and many other departments, Gauteng, also Department of Infrastructure Development, also at some point we're engaging with them to begin to use this license, because the issue here is the use of the licenses and Oracle-based so that they integrate our processes. Now, we were piloting as National Treasury the procurement module. DPSA was piloting the HR module, which is part of the program, which cannot be piggyback on the same pilot in order for them to expand it. So the point that I think we're making is that IFMS program in its current form is being implemented, and it is slow. Now, why is it slow? We did explain that. One of the main reasons when you see that underspending, Chair, is because we went out for tender. Now, if you've got budgeted 100 rands and everyone is bidding, is saying this thing must cost 900 rands, we were not going to award, because clearly there could be misunderstanding as to what we're looking for. And it would have been more irresponsible of me to award a tender at 900 rands when I know I only have 100 rands. So this is the point that Laura was making earlier on in terms of the underspending that's there, and not going to a very expensive rollout process, because that will take IFMS to a different stage in terms of its rollout plan, reaching more organs of state. And so it's not a matter of switching one button and switching off another button. And we cannot afford to really make the government dysfunctional to that point. So by nature, projects of this magnitude are complicated, but we want to share that with you with our own IFMS experts in the room so that they explain where we are at. And then until such time, and I did say, steering committee, there's a steering committee that I chair made up of the DPSA, made up of CETA, made up of Department of Communications, that we steer in this work, and then there's this detailed work and detailed implementation plan that is there. So now when you look at that, until I told the committee last, until such time that we are informed by cabinet to abandon this, then we will abandon it. But my question would be that we've already spent money. We cannot now, when it's really right there, withdraw one of these things can be performed and can be accelerated. And by the way, technology improves, technology changes. Now it's all on. I mean, cloud is the order of the day in the last 2-3 years, and there's going to be an issue as to where and how do we store data. And the IFMS program obviously will have to be modified in terms of approaching some of these things. IT experts will be able on the day to explain where we are at, and we'll be able to demonstrate, perform, a movement. Now, Honorable, again, Laura will come back to this IFMS one, and she will also come back to the SMS one around this. It's mandatory. I mean, and look, it's not only about saying they won't get a performance reward, but it's also about issuing letters, warning letters, or disciplinary processes, because it is mandatory for all SMS to enter into some agreement or some kind. It will be interesting to know, and maybe Laura has got these details so that we know exactly what we did. It's unacceptable if people don't, because it's, again, if you're an SMS member, the public service regulations dictates as such. So it's not an either or. Now, municipalities, Honorable Abraham, and I'm happy you've been consistent on this matter around the performance of municipalities. We are not coping. We will not cope. No system, even if it means then I must have a lot of officials. If we're only talking 43, just as a basic example, these are the worst performers. You also have a total about what, 1A, 170 or something, which are in financial distress that we need to engage with. Only a handful of municipalities are performing. Now, if it's about improvement in financial management, oversight that we must play, we can do that. But Chair, if the system of oversight and governance is not functioning in the whole of South Africa, then the National Treasury on its own cannot do it. It cannot do it because you assume that the PFMA and the Municipal Finance Management Act, underpinning those two pieces of legislation, is the role of accounting officers, and in our own governance arrangements, the processes side built into the legislative frameworks, whether at national government level or at municipal level. We are here sitting with you, Chair, today, and you are holding us accountable on our performance. And it is expected, Honorable Abrahams, that councils, oversight bodies in councils should hold the municipal manager and the CFO and all those Section 57 or 56 managers in the room, and they must account on the performance. Is it happening? You and I know very well that it's not happening, because politics is in the space. It's in your face at municipalities. And this is something that sometimes we are not honest with ourselves to make sure, to know that the dysfunctionality in many of the municipalities is as a result of the political squabbles. The Deputy Minister was here, he should be saying these things. It's not with Minister of Finance at Ndijima municipality 2 weeks ago. We were there, and what I saw on the ground, it is not my day-to-day work area. I was there with Madijan, who handles these things, one of my DDGs. But the reality is that you have squabbles. Sometimes it's between and among political parties, within one party, etc., etc. That's why I'm summarizing by saying that dysfunctionality to an extent is as a result of two. There are instances where there's two municipal managers. there's dysfunctionality in Mangaung, there's dysfunctionality in Lekwa, and dysfunctionality everywhere in some of these challenged municipalities. But until at a point when there's sanity around how politically these matters should be dealt with, the Treasury can try and do things on the margins, we will not cope. And it will not also be in our space when two speakers or the speaker and the mayor are fighting each other. It is not something that the Treasury officials like myself can sort out, but it's also becomes a party issue or an intra-party issue sometimes. And that's politics, which is not my space. Now, the long-term solution is exactly what I'm saying. Politicians must hold each other accountable on these matters that we don't have control over. I'm here to bemoaning the fact that what we see as National Treasury in the function of municipalities is the issue of politics. Now, I wish the chair, the politicians in the room will be able to, from all party political structures, should be able to hear us saying this and engage at the right level with the right fora as to how to address some of these things. But the simple answering to your question around the Abrams, we are not coping as the National Treasury. The challenges are just too many. We all know that we give grants. When we go to, I was in Klerksdorp last weekend. I was in Queenstown recently. There's potholes in the middle of the city, of the town. But when you certainly know that money should be available and is there to at least fix essentially the inner city, but the challenges are many and they're just too many. So, but we are not coping. Honorable Morolong, thank you very much. Laura again will add on the jobs fund question around the ideas that we have around the jobs fund and what we are thinking. Repurposing was in our radar screen, by the way, and it has been featuring prominently as to should we be repurposing the jobs fund? Is the jobs fund at the right place? When we created the jobs fund with a 9 billion rand budget some 12 years ago, there was no home for such programs. Maybe now, 10, 12 years later, there is a different home. So, but the repurposing the jobs fund, in my own worldview, is important. You've got the skills base of what, 50, 60 officials there that cannot be that cannot just be put to waste. So how the jobs fund assists the government in accelerating jobs will remain issue. Again, on the jobs fund, Chair, we've got detailed, we can have a detailed engagement as to the issues that Honorable Roland is asking about the last 3 years and what has been the trajectory of disbursements. We can make that available, but not only available, but I would like the jobs fund management to be in the room and to circulate documentation, and we engage, and we get the wise counsel from the committee around how best to implement the jobs fund. But Laura will talk a little bit about that. Dr. George, maybe it's a misnomer which we must correct, by the way. There is a division in Treasury called public finance. We should actually rename this division, maybe most probably, I think, because your question suggests that there may again be a misunderstanding of this particular program and what it does. And I agree with you broadly. The Constitution is very clear around the management of public finances. And this division is only is an oversight, division called for national departments. Actually, we should just call it national government budget, something like that. DDG, but not call them DDG public finance. In that way, it will make it easy, because there's also oversight that Treasury plays across the system, and I'll explain that just now. But there's also what that division does, which is called public finance under DDG Dr. Mampumudis. They look after national government departments, national government entities, public entities, and those 6 chief directors responsible in this program are just maybe overseeing the implementation of national budgets on a daily basis. And you also have in the same program, budget management, you'll have intergovernmental fiscal relations division, which is playing oversight on provincial spending and municipal spending. But again, that oversight does not mean we have to dictate, going back to the response that I gave to Honorable Abrahams, give it, detailed, there's provincial government oversight bodies like this one. This is at national. You've got such at provinces, you've got portfolio committees, and you've got accounting officers, and there's PFMA and FMA is very clear on the role of the municipal manager and the role of the accounting officer or the role of a DG. Now, if they are not playing their part, then again, the system will be rendered inefficient in a way, because currently what we do have, it's broad, as you say, management of public finances. There are massive leakages, no doubt. There's fruitless and wasteful expenditure, no doubt. Where we are not able to go to each one of the departments and say to departments, there's only a few of us. There's only a few of us, and there's just as many as organs of state. But if the system is functioning, you've got accounting officers performing their roles, you've got audit committees in departments and entities, internal audit committees, one, and also internal audit divisions. You also have oversight. That in that way, it makes our task easier as national government. We are able to know when to disburse. We're able to know when to withhold. But currently, we obviously, as I said to Honorable Abrahams, we cannot manage if the system is not managing. I mean, there's just 4 wheels to the car. If one wheel doesn't function, the car won't move. That's exactly where we are here. That there are aspects of this car that some of the wheels are not turning in a way that they should be turning for the car to go forward. Now, you are right. The state of the public finances, we can only talk about, our head also over and about just looking at these 2 divisions, public finance division and intergovernmental relations division, playing just oversight on the implementation of budgets. You also have a broader role as National Treasury around debt financing, making sure that we, looking after the state of the economy, making sure that, appropriate tax policy measures are implemented. That's the Treasury's bigger role, and the broader role that we play around the management generally of public finance, state funds comes there. So there must be a clear distinction, Chair, and we are trying where we are. We may be failing based on the performance that's indicated today, but I can tell you, who try at all times to just fulfill, and sometimes to become irritating to the system, because the kind of questions that we are asking are not just palatable to some of the colleagues that we work with in the whole of government, including asking some of the key questions to some of the service providers, and when we see that the performance of some contracts is not what it should be. So the task that we do, Chair, and with your support, is not an easy one. But at the bottom of the system, the crux of the system is, if politicians keep us accountable and hold us accountable, we should come here and appear, be asked difficult questions. Someone must do the same in Mangaung. The municipal manager must appear before some tribunal, some committee. Why are they not performing what they should be doing? Why are there potholes in the city center? But we all know the challenges there, and we read about these challenges. The AG tells us all of these challenges from an audit point of view. Deep, real issues that are controversial have to be dealt with. We should not be fearful, But now all that we all know, as I said, and I'm trying to say it as proper as I can. I know you tell me I'm out of order. At the center of the management of public finances, we can only play a small role. As per the Constitution, we are trying, and I think where I am, I'll be the first one to say, the colleagues I work with work very hard in ensuring this. And if they don't, they obviously will be exposed. But the crux of our challenges in municipalities and in some provincial departments, and also in some departments, is the politics, which is not my domain, Chair. Thank you very much. Laura, do you want to some of those points that I didn't talk to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, DD. Committee Chair and committee, thank you very much for the questions. I'll address some of the matters around the Jobs Fund, the performance agreements, and IFMS. In terms of the Jobs Fund, it's important to note that the underperformance is not that there was no funds dispersed, rather than they did not reach their target. So for this year, we had, for this quarter, I apologize, not this year, this quarter, we had intended to disperse 6.317 million, and we dispersed 6.075 million. So it's an underperformance rather than a non-performance. In terms of the figures that was requested over the period, the 3-year period, the target in 2019-20 million, and we dispersed 5,037 million. The target for 2021 was 5,778 million, and we dispersed 5,687 million. And the target for 2021-22 was 6.317 million, and as indicated, we dispersed 6,075 million. So re-emphasizing, money has been dispersed, but not to the extent that we originally targeted. However, this is not an indication of underperformance. This is an indication of the stringent controls that the Jobs Fund applies prior to it dispersing public money, either in terms of performance milestones that need to be reached by the beneficiaries, or the funds that the beneficiaries need to contribute as per the rules of the fund. In terms of performance agreements, the committee will know historically and by practice, Treasury has achieved 100% of performance agreements being signed by SMSs. That will be taken. It's my understanding that in terms of the SMS cohort, it was 3 performance agreements that were not signed on time. So it's not that no performance agreements will be signed at all, but rather our indicator is that the performance agreement is signed, and it's signed in terms of the deadline. And we are addressing that, and will ensure that the performance agreement A is signed, but there is consequence management. So it's not just that performance bonuses won't be paid. As the committee knows, Treasury has taken a position of leading the public service in terms of recognising the challenges of the fiscus when it comes to matters of performance rewards, but consequence management is being affected on those 3 employees. In terms of the IFMS, just to clarify, that the reference that is made by the chair is to the support and maintenance. The licenses that have been bought, as the chair known, are in perpetuity. When you buy an Oracle license, it's in perpetuity unless you change your system and elect to go with a different model. But the support and maintenance is in effect linked to those licenses. Just before we speak about the renewal, it's important to note that without having support and maintenance to support licenses, some of which are being used. It's not that no licenses are being used. Licenses are being used. And in order to support those licenses, in the absence of support and maintenance, we will not have access to updates. So it will not be possible to run IFMS that is currently being developed. The iRecruitment module is being developed. We will not be able to roll it out because recipient departments and provinces will not accept rolling out a module on an old version of a platform. So we would not have access to updates. We would not have access to security patches. Now, the committee will know that security and IT is an absolute priority for government, and it's imperative that we don't open a window by not having security patches for any risk into the IT systems, especially given that these IT systems that we will be rolling out are linked to the finances of government. We will lose the discounts that we receive from the onset of the Oracle licensing process, which is 98% of the cost. We will have 150% if we were to suspend the support and maintenance and then want to reactivate it at a later point. We will receive 150% penalty of the amount of the support and maintenance. So effectively, we will be paying more. And as the committee will know, a penalty is irregular and wasteful expenditure. At the point that we reinitiate the support and maintenance, it will be backdated to pay to the point that we suspended it. So it is important to note that the financial implications for the support and maintenance on the system that is now we're now in an implementation phase with the first module will be significant for Treasury. And so as we are implementing our recruitment module, it's imperative that we have access to that support and maintenance, that the licenses that are being used has access to support and maintenance, and that we don't incur expenditure on support and maintenance if we were to suspend it. Therefore, the renewal is not in terms of the contract. The discount schedule that was originally obtained as part of the original licensing contract has a discount schedule across a number of years. As we reach a step change in the discount schedule, we re-sign because it is a change in the amount that we are paying. Also, to remember that the implementation of IFMS, recognizing the delays, is accelerating. Certainly the appointment of full-time management in IFMS, as well as a much better governance process, and now having access to resources. The committee will see that each time we've reported delivery, and we certainly will be reporting implementation delivery going forward. I think those were the three things that I was asked to speak to. I think it's important just in terms of performance monitoring, generally in terms of Treasury. One of the things that we calculate, although it's quite difficult to calculate, but we do, as we're wanting to mature our performance system, is not only to calculate the performance of Treasury, but to calculate the impact of if Treasury was not performing a task. And in that way, give us some sense of, because that will help with our prioritization. So if Treasury has limited resources, what is the direct performance, i.e. performance against an indicator, but equally what would be the consequence to assist Treasury was not performing. And this is an important calculation because whilst it does not resolve all of the challenges, such as the one that was referred to by honourable members, we are certainly calculating what would be the implication for the system if public finance was not doing that oversight that they are currently responsible for. Thank you so much, DG.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks. Honorable members, follow-up questions? Let me make a follow-up teaching so that we're at the same wavelength of understanding this issue of IFMS. On the let's get this phone off. 30th November last year, when we were compiling the BRRR, this is what you said, DG, that one, Mr. Moajana explained that the fruitless and wasteful expenditure had been incurred primarily for technical support maintenance of software licenses for IFMS. He said that this finding had been expected as this has been a matter of contestation between the Office of the Auditor General and National Treasury for some years. He explained that National Treasury has provided a detailed response to the material notice, and it will continue to engage with the AG on this issue. He explained that National has obtained a legal advice and will take the AG finding through the objection process. He also explained that this matter predated his term as DG, but he agrees with the approach his predecessor had taken. 2.7. Mr. Moajana further responded on issues raised by the committee on the 9 November meeting on IFMS. He explained that there had been progress on the implementation of the IFMS project, although it has not been as rapid as he would like it. He said that there had been delays in the procurement processes for the IFMS. He said that the bid for the phase 2B of the project had been cancelled because the proposed price far exceeded the budgeted amount, and National Treasury wanted value for money. Okay. 2, you came to us here to the committee responding to the Auditor General's audit finding. And this was, you developed a template as to how are you addressing the findings of the Auditor General. Then finding description. Effective and appropriate steps were not taken to prevent fruitless and wasteful expenditure on IFMS. The root cause, effective and appropriate steps were not taken to prevent fruitless expenditure. Accounting officer did not implement adequate oversight and monitoring. Recommendation. Management is recommended to ensure that all year findings related to the IFMS are addressed. Management should strengthen expenditure management in order to prevent the recurrence of fruitless. Take effective consequence management action against those responsible for the fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So you also have to explain today whether you have taken those steps against those who caused this wasteful expenditure. Action plan. IFM's program and its partners are currently exploring alternative options for procurement and implementation. Furthermore, a license consolidation and repurposing initiative is underway where the department with similar licenses in the IFMS will be allocated licenses for utilization while planning and execution of the IMS program is underway. Responsible official, Dikele Livia, Loram Seme, Priya Luchman. Management status. CETA is going to involve in procurement and of the service from May 21 and so on and so on. And then a comment. It's not us who started with this issue of procurement and the contract. It's the AG. And you are saying that you don't agree with the AG and you want to take the AG for review. And we're not sure how far you are in taking the AG for review. We never started this matter. It has been there all along, and the AG has been raising this. You don't agree. You want to take the AG for review, and you haven't done that. So when we ask you questions, we say we totally misunderstand what IFMS is all about. We do oversight DG on the basis of what we have. This is what I have from the AG. This is what we also have from the BRRR that we have. So this total misunderstanding, we don't understand where you get it from. We are knowledgeable about what we are doing, DG. We have been doing this work for many years. And AG is one institution that assists portfolio and standing committees to do their oversight work. There is procurement involved here. It's not us who just generate things from nowhere. It's on the basis of the AG's report. Go back and study that report, what it says. But what you say is that you don't agree with the report. So what do we do? If you don't agree with the AG, that's something else. And we don't know how far you are. But that is a subject for another day. But respond to the things that have been raised by yourselves and the AG in regard to IFMS, rather than saying that we have got a complete misunderstanding. I think that's an insult. And I'm sure if you are referring to us, we have a very serious understanding of what we are doing, DG. Over to you.
Chair, apologies if I came across as if I'm, I'm putting you in the state that you're in now. That's not the intention. That's not the intention at all. I've interacted with you many times in this committee, and at no point did I undermine your understanding of your work, and I will never do that. And it will be out of my character to even try and suggest that you don't understand your work. So it's not what I'm saying. But when I say maybe there's a total misunderstanding, Chair, it is on the sentence that says, we've extended the IFMS contract. Now, my response was that maybe there's a misunderstanding in terms of what that means, because there's no contract that has been extended. IFMS contract hasn't been extended. It's on that sentence and nothing else in terms of what my response was all about. So, but I'm still saying if it's it's only when I said, Chair, that maybe there could be a misunderstanding from your side in terms of what this is, because we did not extend an IFMS contract at all. But again, the background that you mentioned is quite important. Now, the issue about material irregularity is there currently with the AG. We've had endless meetings with the AG, including the colleagues in the AG office who engage with this. It's going to be a while, Chair, to find each other on this matter with the AG and what that means. And you will, again, in the next iteration, go to your notes and say, but what have you done with the officials who made sure that this, IFMS, the irregular spending is incurred? And as an accounting officer, based on the issues that we have and the understanding of where we are with this IFMS program and where the AG is at, because we are at odds with the AG about whether this is fruitless and wasteful expenditure or not. And then we contested, and we've been saying that it is not. And that's why they even went a step further. Now, for me as an accounting officer to go and discipline someone, who am I going to discipline? Because there's no point person that I can go and discipline because they've committed this. Unless the explanation and the detailed explanation that Laura gave around the contractual arrangement on Oracle, then on that own, then I will be very irresponsible to stop payment of licenses as per the original agreement, because of the penalties that are built into a contract that was signed by my predecessor and colleagues who were at the IFMS program at the time. Then it's not only going to be millions, Chair, it could be a lot of money that we have to take now by just simply not paying licenses. What the AG, and it will be like that, and the AG knows that, and that's why you've been at it for long, Chair. It's going to be the same. The 67 million rand that we're paying annually on license fees, and the AG says, no, this is fruitless and wasteful expenditure because these things are in the cupboard, you are not using these licenses. What we are saying to the committee today, demonstrated by the work that the Western Cape is undertaking in using the same licenses that are in the cupboard, that the AG says they are fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We are using the 67 million that we're spending, parts of those licenses that we're paying every year. And we have to pay, by the way, for, as Laura explained, for the updates and the security checks and whatever to be updated at any given point, anyone who's going to come on and start using these licenses, they will need maintenance and support. That is also part of the contract. So that's why, Chair, I was saying, and I still maintain, Chair, that we would want to engage the committee on this program. Present in the room should be the Minister of Finance and the Deputy Minister, if it means that, so that we are understood. And if Parliament is of the view that this program must be abandoned, that at that level, that decision must be taken. Because I think where we are here, Parliament, we are saying to Parliament today that as part of rectifying, as part of implementation of this program, we want to accelerate, we want to start using these licenses that the AG refers as fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Western Cape is going to use them. The IRIC. Secondly, we are going around the system, organs of state, to check where Oracle licenses are being used so that they can be replaced. If the agreement allows that by these licenses that already national government is paying for. As I said, and I intervened when Laura was presenting, and I said, we received a letter last week from KZN, Department of Transport, who are requesting to participate in these contracts, Oracle contracts, so that they are able to advance whatever they want to do there. And as I said, the department, colleagues who will deal with these things are looking into that to allow. And this is part of the implementation of the program that is IFMS. Now, until such time that this is abandoned, then I don't have a choice but to implement. And abandonment can only be, and I know ministers are talking. The governance committee of the IFMS project comprising of ministers met, and there's a view from some of the ministers that maybe we must relook at this and that, and maybe even with the idea of stopping this. And so, and obviously that conversation is ongoing. It's not conclusive. But yeah, until such time that that's ongoing, I will continue looking for opportunities and options that will make this irregular expenditure disappear in terms of the implementation of the licenses. That AG for years has been saying this is fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And we've been arguing that it's not, because firstly, and just to give a little bit of background that we will give when we meet and engage the committee in detail. I may get the numbers wrong, but I think I'm right. At the time when I was still not in the space, but I was in the treasury, so I can recall what could have been discussions at the time. We paid the charge, to buy these licenses was going to cost us 780 whatever million at the time. But it was then agreed that we pay, and this is the negotiations now with Oracle as acquiring these licenses, which is going to be the bedrock of the implementation of the IFMS program. A discount was given, and we ended up paying like 400+ million at the time. Now, if the AG at the time was saying, but this is fruitless and wasteful or irregular, whatever, or there's no value for money, at the time, it made sense for the accounting officer of that time to save government 400, 500 million rand in acquiring these licenses. And at the time, it was on the backdrop of a program that was there that was going to be implemented. When I came in as DG, there were program implementation challenges, Chair, that I came in immediately, and there was a long period where I stopped any payment from happening because there were internal audit with and checking with, and we are correcting the program. So, and the AG's point has always been consistent on this. They say, no, there's been delays in implementation. Yes, there were delays that I took for reasons that I didn't want to further incur expenditure that I cannot account for. And we have been very instrumental since. There was a forensic investigation in IFMS. The report is available. Because again, during the process of investigation, I did not want to incur any expenditure when I did not know, as a new accounting officer, what's happening in IFMS. The report came, the report identified certain deficiencies. Those deficiencies are implemented, they are being corrected, and the AG is aware of that. Now, when all of this happens, And the AG, every year in, year out, they raise the same issue until at a point where this matter is then categorized as material irregularity, and we are taking it on. And the consequences in terms of the Public Audit Act of the Material are dire, even for myself, individual, as a person, as an accounting officer. I cannot just sit back and lie low and just hope that it will be sorted. But it's important that we not only look at this we have to look at it at the broader impact that it has on government, the spending that happens, the implications as to what will happen if I stop this. Because what we normally advise departments and organs of state is that you immediately, if there's irregular spending or fruitless, you stop it and gauge the consequence. When I stop it, we can even pay almost double, I think, based on, we have to go into the agreements. We can double check that and tell you the implications directly of what it means to stop the to stop paying, for these licenses, and the discount, and how we will lose the discount that we got back in 2015, 2016. And all of this is all in the agreement. It's not something that, Chair, I'm making it up as I'm speaking with you. Still appeal, Chair, that we would then want to engage the committee. We will await the visit that you had promised us to engage further on IFMS and its implementation. And we can then decide how we carry on. And what we all know is that, for instance, these old systems, your BEPS, your PERSALs, they are dated, they cannot be supported, they cannot be going on forever. We at some point have to change those. But I guess it's a decision that we'll have to make as time goes on. But Chair, once more, apologies if I came out as suggesting that the committee does not know what it's doing. I would never say that, and I've never said that in my working life with such committees in Parliament. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tichi. Remember, we wanted to come to National Treasury, and what happened was that there was a trip that the minister and the DG were taking to America. I'm not sure whether you are attending a meeting of World Bank and or IMF.
Yes, Chair, it was the spring meetings of the World Bank and IMF. Yes, you're right.
Yes. So we were scheduled to come to National Treasury. Then there was that letter that we received that you are going to America. Hence, we had to change to visit, I think, FFC, because the other institutions that we were visiting was the Land Bank and the Sasria. So we'll create space to come there. If needs be, we can even meet those that committee of ministers. Because what we are saying is that the Auditor General, in terms of the Constitution, is the supreme audit institution of South Africa. And if they make an audit, there's no reason why Parliament should differ with them, because we work very closely with Chapter 9 institutions who assist us to do our oversight work, be it the AG, the PP, and the other institutions which are there. So let's come to Treasury, and we'll also bring the AG on board. The AG should be there at Treasury so that you explain in simple terms, because this is more than 5-year problem, and this does not seem to be a solution as of now, more especially in regard to the audit of the AG. And so let's take it from there and see how we deal with it moving forward. Let's move to the next item of, is it the Kuwait, Alan, what is it? The Kuwait Agreement, let me check. Yeah.
Yes, Chair, there's two agreements. One is the South Africa Kuwait, and then there's also a BEPS one. But Yanga's online and she will take the committee through that.
Okay. Yanga, item 6. Briefing by National Treasury on the Protocol Amending Agreement between the government of RSA and the government of the State of Kuwait and other related matters.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, honorable members. First of all, I want to apologize for our DTG, Mr. Ismail Momoniat, who normally leads on the tax issues. He's caught up in another meeting, so he requested that I should lead the briefing on these issues. With me, we have our SARS colleagues, Mr. Franz Tomasek, who's leading from the SARS side, and from our side, we've got Nhlanhla Khatebe Khayaletu, and Mr. Franz Tomasek is with Celeste and Monefan Nikek. Chair, the purpose of the protocol is to amend an existing tax treaty. You remember last year we were in Parliament in September, and the briefing on Kuwait was on the parliamentary program, but we have to remove it because the state law advisor advised us that it should serve before the cabinet based on the delays. So because we couldn't do it last year based on the state law advisor recommendation, we are coming back to do it this year because it cannot be ratified without going through this process, Chair. The background to this protocol, which amends the tax treaty between South Africa and Kuwait, starts from the fact that the current tax treaty between South Africa and Kuwait came into force in 2006. And the proposed amendments to the current tax treaty became necessary as a result of changes to the South African tax legislation. That is when South Africa announced the changes to the secondary tax on companies to a tax on dividend shareholder level, because we used to tax dividends at company level, but now we move them to tax at shareholder level. So the implementation of dividend withholding tax was contingent to the renegotiation of the tax treaties. I think there were about 10 countries that we had to renegotiate because they had zero withholding tax on dividends. So we could not implement this in terms of the domestic law if those withholding tax on dividends, especially our major trading partners like UK and Australia. Because this implied that if we did not renegotiate these treaties, dividends going to those countries will not be subject to tax. So the renegotiations took place between 2007 and 2008 and were concluded in 2008. And all the protocols, all those protocols that we negotiated are in force, except for the SA Kuwait protocol. For the past 10 years, we have been requesting Kuwait to sign the protocol because we also had a court case that we're gonna come later on the slide. But when the proposed dates of the signature will come, Kuwait will come with issues like there are technical amendments that we need to do to the text. No, the ambassador cannot sign, the rules have changed and all that. So the challenge regarding the delay in the signing, we had discussions with DECO now regarding the termination of a tax treaty with Kuwait because we're losing on the issue of dividends. And then the issue of termination of the tax treaty with Kuwait was raised with Kuwait during Kuwait visit in 2019 here in South Africa. And I remember the deputy minister promised that the treaty will be signed. So South Africa, we signed in 2019. We decided not to terminate the treaty, not to do that because the deputy minister during the state visit promised that it's gonna be signed. So from our side in South Africa, our minister signed on 17 December 2019. So after signature, we took the treaty to the Kuwait embassy in South Africa because Kuwait promised us that their ambassador, unlike South Africa, because in South Africa, only the cabinet minister can sign the treaty. In Kuwait, an ambassador, they told us that the ambassador can sign the treaty. So when it was time for signing, they said, no, the ambassador cannot sign. Finally, the treaty was only signed on 1 April 2021 when Minister Naledi Pandor visited Kuwait. So although the protocol is now signed, it cannot come into force. This implies that the dividends that are paid to Kuwait are still subject to zero withholding tax because it requires parliamentary ratification. I've said that we put it on the program last year, but we had to take it to Cabinet, and Cabinet approved it on 16 March 2022. And today, we request the Standing Committee to consider it for ratification. Next slide. We want to say there's an urgency regarding the ratification of this Kuwait Treaty. And it is important that even though South Africa can ratify, it can take some time for Kuwait to ratify, because even if we can ratify, if Kuwait has not yet ratified, the treaty cannot come into force. And we are concerned that if non-ratification, we may encounter some of the delays that we encounter in this regard. We don't know how long will it take for the Kuwait to ratify the protocol. But now that everyone is aware, DECO is aware, you are aware, because if there is further delays in Kuwait in ratification, meaning that we have to approach DECO again, as well as the necessary procedures to terminate the tax treaty, because it requires parliamentary approval for the termination of the tax treaty. So as you have said, that the agency regarding the entry into force is forced by the fact that on 19 January 2019, the Netherlands Supreme Court ruled against us, against the tax treaty between South Africa and Netherlands. What happened is that Netherlands was one of the countries that we were to negotiate with, or one of the 10 countries. And Netherlands, we negotiated first. So the problem with us when we negotiate tax treaties is that they always want a clause which is called most favored nation clause, whereby we can state in the tax treaty that the treatment that we are giving to you, we're gonna give it to all other countries. So unfortunately, because Netherlands was one of the first movers, we had to include in the protocol what is called the most favored nation clause, which states that all those countries that we have to negotiate with, we have to negotiate with all the 10 countries, and all the 10 countries, the treaty, the protocol will come into force regarding the taxation of dividends. And if one country did not implement this, this will imply that the other country that has got a most favored nation clause, the article cannot be implemented. So that is what, in a nutshell, is the most favored nation clause with regard to the South Africa-Netherlands tax treaty. So because Kuwait protocol is still not yet in force, this implies that the dividends, we can't implement the protocol between South Africa and Netherlands treaty, and dividends paid by South Africa to go to both Kuwait and to Netherlands will not be subject to withholding tax on dividends, so they are tax-free. So that is a major loss to the fiscus. Hence, if this treaty is not ratified on time by Kuwait, we will have to have strong measures, because ever since 2009, dividends that are paid by South Africa to Netherlands and dividends that are paid by South Africa to Kuwait are not subject to withholding tax on dividends because of the tax treaty. Next slide. So now we've done the background as to why we are here. Coming to the actual proposed amendments to the tax treaty. Chair, we wish to note that even though the rationale for the negotiation of this tax treaty was mainly to update the Article 10 dealing with tax treatment of dividends, but countries will find that Kuwait decided that, there are other articles that we want to renegotiate if we've got a window to renegotiate. So one of those articles in the protocol is Article 1, dealing with taxes covered, and then it deals with taxes covered in Article 2 of the tax treaty. Here, Kuwait requested that we change the list of existing taxes that are covered by the tax treaty. And then in the case of Kuwait, the agreement will apply to all the taxes covered in terms of the laws of Kuwait. And then in the South African context, we did not request any changes, and the tax treaty will apply to normal tax, withholding tax on royalties, dividends tax, withholding tax on interest, and tax on foreigners and sports persons. foreign entertainers and sports persons. So in South Africa, we did not change anything. And we know that the tax treaties apply only to income tax. It does not apply to indirect taxes like VAT. Next slide. And then another article that was changed, that we renegotiated, was Article 4 of the agreement dealing with resident. And then Kuwait requested that in the case of Kuwait, the current definition of the term dividend, the resident, sorry, be deleted and be replaced with the term resident as follows: a Kuwait national or a company or an entity which is incorporated in Kuwait. That is an international practice that a company that is incorporated in a particular country is regarded as tax resident in that particular country, as well as an individual who is present in Kuwait for a period totaling 183 days in the fiscal year. So that is also an international standard, which is regarded as a physical presence test to say that if an individual is present in a particular country for that period, that individual will be regarded as tax resident in that particular country. The next slide. Then Article 3 dealing with dividends. It is important to note that this is the reason why South Africa requested the proposed changes to the tax treaty, so that we can renegotiate the Article 10 dealing with taxation of dividends. And what happens is that the previous tax treaty, as we said, dividends paid from South Africa to Kuwait or from Kuwait to South Africa were not subject to dividend withholding tax. So now when we renegotiated the tax treaty, we introduced the shared right of taxation of dividends between the source state of dividends. And then when we introduced the shared right of taxation, we also introduced a withholding tax rate for taxation of dividends in the source state to say 5% if the shareholding is at least 10% and 10% current rates for withholding. Those are the rates that are available in most of the tax treaties that we have. And then we also introduced exemption for dividends paid to government, as well as central bank, as well as wholly owned entities by government, that there is exemption in respect of those because that is regarded as government. The next slide. We also renegotiated the withholding tax on interest because South Africa also introduced withholding tax on interest. And also in this case, we introduced the shared right of taxation in respect of interest paid. As a result, we introduced the withholding tax rate in the source state of 5% on the gross amount of interest paid. So if maybe South Africa pays interest to Kuwait, then we're gonna do a withholding tax of 5%. And then also introduced a similar exemption to say that interest paid by government or central bank or reserve bank or wholly owned state entities are exempt. Next slide. We also renegotiated an article dealing with capital gains. This was in line with international standards, whereby we introduced a provision whereby we wanted to tax the gains derived from the sale of shares in a company deriving more than 50% of their value directly from immovable property. Because what happened is that if maybe there is a company that is owning immovable property in South Africa and foreigners like Kuwait residents have got shares in that company, then as soon as the company sells their shares, then we're gonna tax the capital gains, selling the shares in respect of immovable property. Next slide. And then with regard to exchange of information, we renegotiated this to be in line with international standard, because when we come to the BEPS MLI that we're gonna do after the Kuwait, there was an international standard that was introduced after the 2008 financial crisis regarding the sharing of information in terms of the tax treaty. So in this regard, it was said that even though the tax treaty covered only income taxes, but the exchange of information you can exchange information in respect of every taxes of every kind and description. This implies that you can exchange information with respect to income tax, with respect to VAT, with respect to excise duties, even though they are not covered by the treaty, but you can exchange information. Of information now is spontaneous. You're not going to wait when you see that there's something wrong that taxpayers are doing. So you can just inform the Kuwaitis, and then the Kuwaitis can inform South Africa if they think that there is a need to exchange information in that regard. And the exchange of information also is not going to be limited by bank secrecy to say that, no, I can't exchange information because of bank secrecy. No, not solely for that. That was extended. And that was also based on international standards. The next slide. The final provision in the protocol amending the tax treaty between South Africa and Kuwait was the entry into force, of which is very important in terms of the state law advisor, because they will ask, how long will the protocol remain in force? And we'll tell that the protocol will remain in force as long as the treaty is in force. And then another thing, when we are renegotiating a protocol with another country, and then there is another language. For example, in Kuwait, the protocol, there are two languages to the protocol because there's English, there's Arabic text. So we also say that even though both the English and Arabic text of the protocol are equally authentic, in the case of dispute, the English text will prevail. Thank you, Chair. That's all to the Kuwait protocol. Any questions before we move to the BEPS MLI?
Okay, Madam Yanga. Honorable members, that is the presentation on the protocol with Kuwait. Comments, questions? Agreed? Noxie?
Oh, Chair, I'm just saying we've noted the presentation, Chair.
Encos. Oh, good. Yanga, you can move to the next, proceed to the next presentation.
Thank you, Chair. The next presentation refers to the BEPS MLI multilateral instrument. And I just want to give a brief background regarding the BEPS MLI, because when we did informal briefing, it was in 2016 before the signature. So now we're gonna give a brief background so that as to why we are here regarding the BEPS MLI. So after the 2008 financial crisis, the G20 ministers agreed to a framework to address the tax havens, as well as multinational enterprises regarding the tax base erosion and profit shifting. And then on October 2015, there was a BEPS action plan. It is important to note that South Africa is the only country that is the member of the G20, hence we're part of the negotiations. However, South Africa is not a member of the OECD, but is one of the member countries that forms part of the inclusive framework on BEPS. And this inclusive framework on BEPS consists of about 137 countries, both OECD and non-OECD, and of which 23 are African countries. And all of us, we collaborate on the implementation of the BEPS package. So we assist in developing the standards for the implementation, review, and monitoring of the BEPS package. The next slide. So this BEPS, and one of the action items is the development of the multilateral instrument for implementing the BEPS treaty-related measures. South Africa, we signed the BEPS MLI on 7 June 2017. As of last year, there were 95 countries that have signed, of which 13 are African countries. although we signed the BEPS MLI on 7 June 2017, however, the MLI is not yet in force because South Africa has not yet ratified. We did mention in the budget that we're gonna ratify the MLI last year, but it had to serve before cabinet also. And it served before cabinet on 16 March 2022. Next slide. So the BEPS MLI is aimed at updating all the existing bilateral tax treaties The BEPS MLI, it incorporates the following treaty-related measures. Action 2, dealing with hybrid mismatches. Action 6, dealing with treaty abuse. Action 7, dealing with artificial avoidance of PE. Action 14, dealing with improving dispute resolution. Next slide. So this BEPS MLI, even though it will be updating the existing bilateral tax treaties, however, it will be applied alongside the existing tax treaties. However, there may be circumstances in which a country prefers not to include a specific treaty in the scope of the application of the BEPS MLI. And also, there may be circumstances in which a country is allowed to enter reservations. So when we do the presentation on the articles covered as we will show where South Africa has made reservation and where South Africa has decided not to include some of the tax treaties in the BEPS MLI and the reason for doing so. Next slide. Now, in the South African context, how will the BEPS MLI apply? South Africa has 79 bilateral tax treaties in force, with 2 more tax treaties awaiting ratification by other countries. In terms of the BEPS MLI, 76 tax treaties have been listed by South Africa to be covered by the BEPS MLI. These 76 tax treaties will, once those countries have ratified the BEPS MLI, meet the international related BEPS measures. As of August 2021, 42 of the 76 countries in the South African context have already ratified the BEPS MLI. So now, which tax treaties will the BEPS MLI not apply to? Only 5 tax treaties will not be covered by the BEPS MLI, namely Germany, Zambia, Malawi, Grenada, and Sierra Leone. And the reason why we did not include these tax treaties is that with Germany, Malawi, and Zambia, we are renegotiating this on bilateral terms because those countries were already on renegotiation. So they said that we can include all those provisions that are in the BEPS MLI in the bilateral tax treaty. You remember, Chair, last week on the 1st of September, we did an informal briefing on the Germany in this regard. Others are still in the process of renegotiation. However, with regard with Grenada and Sierra Leone, those tax treaties were signed long time ago. So they are not compatible with the provisions of the BEPS MLI. So we have to do a renegotiation altogether of those treaties. Next slide. Coming to the agency of the BEPS MLI, it is urgent for South Africa to ratify this because about last month, there was a peer review mechanism that was done on South Africa in terms of exchange of information and common reporting standard. And we stated that we will be ratifying the BEPS MLI. So if we do not ratify the BEPS MLI, in terms of Action 6 peer review, we get a negative point in this regard when we have not yet ratified. So today we present to you to the committee for consideration for ratification of the BEPS MLI by the National Assembly. So over to SARS to deal with the articles that are changing covered by the BEPS MLI. Thank you,
Thank you, Younger, and good morning to the Chair and honourable members. So the first is the usual type of introduction, the scope of the convention with Article 1 and Article 2 dealing with the interpretation of terms. I think a key one here, Younger has already dealt with, which is the concept of a covered tax agreement. And she's translated that into the practical steps South Africa is taking. So we can move on to the next slide. And here we start dealing with issues like hybrid mismatches. So in Article 3, we deal with what are known as hybrid entities or transparent entities. So this is to deal with the situation where one country thinks a entity is a transparent entity. So in South Africa, for example, a partnership, it isn't an entity on its own. You look at the people who are members of the partnership to determine who gets taxed. But in another country, a particular kind of partnership may be considered to be a company. And so it is the entity that is taxed, not the members of the entity. And so that creates the ability to do some innovative tax planning, let's say. And this then ensures that that opportunity is taken away. Now, in a South African context, we already have provisions that deal with another variation on this theme, which is the concept of a hybrid instrument, where one country thinks something is debt, but the other country thinks it is equity. But it's not part of this, so we don't need to deal with it. Dual resident entities. So this deals with the case where a company is set up in such a way that it is a resident of two countries. And so then the question is, so which country should get the primary taxing rights and which country gets the residual taxing rights? Because now both are claiming that it is a resident of that country. And again, this is an area where with some planning, you can arrange for a desirable tax outcome. So what this does is it says, if you're in a situation where a company has residence in two countries, the two competent authorities need to get together to decide where the company is resident. And if they can't agree, then it is denied treaty benefits and it would have to fall back on domestic measures to relieve double taxation. And we have those in South Africa. But what this does is it ensures that you cannot game the system by relying on a set of rigid rules that would otherwise be used. This is included in South Africa's current model and in the international models precisely for that. And essentially this then updates the older treaties. So again, you'll see South Africa has not entered a reservation. We would like this to apply. Then we move on to Article 5, which is application of methods for the elimination of double taxation. South Africa has reserved on this one because we already have domestic law which deals with these issues if it is not dealt with in the double taxation agreement. So we don't need to build this one in, and we can move on to the next slide. Now, Article 6 introduces a part of a preamble to our double taxation agreements. And the key part here is that up until now, everyone's taken it that the point of a double taxation agreement is to avoid double taxation and to enable exchange of information. Now, what this does, and the important words here, is it introduces the concept that these agreements should be interpreted through the lens of not creating opportunities for non-taxation or reduced taxation through tax evasion or avoidance. So the key issue here then is it gives a court or anybody who is interpreting the treaty guidance as to what the desired result is. So that if you see that there is in fact a structure or a bit of planning that is going on that is in fact creating an opportunity to create non-taxation or reduced taxation that is not consistent with the spirit of the agreement, that you should bear this in mind, that that was not the purpose of the agreement. And we'll come to that now in Article 7, which is the prevention of treaty abuse. Now, what this does is it says, if you try to enter into an arrangement where one of the principal purposes, and this is the principal purpose tax, the PPT, is to gain a tax advantage that is not in accordance with the spirit of the agreement, then that tax benefit can be denied. And so that is the approach that South Africa wishes to follow, because it's one that we have some experience with, given that it is largely aligned with our general anti-avoidance rule in the Income Tax Act, which also has a test, a slightly stricter test. It says the main purpose is to get a tax benefit. Here it is one of the principal purposes. That was the source of a good deal of debate back when we were amending the general anti-avoidance rule. And we stuck with our traditional approach in the end, although the question of moving to this one of the principal approaches was considered at the time. There are some other added layers you can put onto this, which are the so-called limitation of benefits clauses. The difficulty here is that they get very complex very quickly. The benefits approach covers some 4 pages of text in the MLI. Just to give you a sense, if that's the simplified one, you can only imagine what the detailed one looks like. So South Africa has gone for the principal purpose test as the primary mechanism. Moving on to Article 8. Now, here what you have is a scenario where, again, the planning may be that in order to get the advantage of a reduced withholding tax on dividends, you change the shareholding of the company for a brief period so that it moves off to a non-resident in a treaty jurisdiction, and then you put it back where it belongs at a later stage. Now, that is clearly not something that we would like to see. So what this provision does is that you must have held the shares for 365 days before the dividend. So again, these kinds of short-term timed transactions to sidestep the rules or take advantage of the rules becomes much more difficult. Similarly for capital gains. So here what you have is a situation where, as Younger explained with the Kuwait Agreement, you have a company that is worth more, whose worth is more than 50% attributable to fixed property. So what you could theoretically now do is inject some other assets into this company so it drops below the 50% level, sell the company, and then you can extract the assets out again. So once more, there's a 365-day period that comes into play here so that you can't do these short-term injections and extractions to try and sidestep rules. Moving on, Article 10. Here we have establishment jurisdictions. Here, South Africa has reserved our position because we think the PPT already covers this, so we don't need it. If it turns out that is incorrect, as Younger has mentioned, we can withdraw the reservation, but rather than add complexity at this stage, we have reserved. Article 11, this should actually go without saying, but a treaty should not impact, except in fairly limited ways, on how you can tax your own residents. So this then just confirms that, and South Africa would not be entering a reservation there because we believe that's a useful clarification. We can then move on to the next slide. Okay, we now get to the artificial avoidance of permanent establishment status through commissionaire arrangements. Now, a commissionaire arrangement is typically a civil law problem for countries that use a civil law system instead of a common law system. South Africa uses a common law system, so we have entered a reservation on this article. Then we get to Article 13, which deals with the artificial avoidance of permanent establishment status through specific activity exemptions. That's a mouthful. Essentially, what the treaties have done up until now is there are certain kinds of activities which are considered to be preparatory activities which don't rise to the level where, if they happen in your jurisdiction, they lead to a taxing right over those activities. Now, the problem with that is that some of those activities can become much, much more important in a digital world. So, for example, you may have a platform sells from overseas into your jurisdiction, but then to speed up the times, it puts a warehouse in your jurisdiction so that they can get the goods to the customers faster than if they were shipped cross-border. So this creates a difficulty. And so what this option A here does in this particular article is it says, hang on, the fact that it is merely a storage warehouse, for example, doesn't automatically mean that it should qualify for exemption or an exception. You need to look at the overall structure of what's happening and see, is this something that is just auxiliary, preparatory or auxiliary, or is this something that is in fact key, so that you can't take advantage of new business models to sidestep proper taxation. And so South Africa has elected option A here because it is the stricter of the two options. Option B is not as strict. And there is then also an tool, because what you could conceivably do is slice up multiple activities into separate companies or separate locations in a country, and then try and argue that each of these little bite-sized chunks are only preparatory or auxiliary. And so there's now a rule that says if someone tries to do that, you aggregate them all together and then you look at the picture to see if that is still the case. So that's the anti-fragmentation rule. And clearly that makes sense to prevent tax planning. So we have opted for that as well. Moving on to the next slide, the splitting up of contracts. Again, this is pretty artificial, so we think we can deal with that through the PPT. So that we have reserved a position on. Article 15 now comes into play to define what a closely related person is. So the international equivalent of what would be called a connected person in South African tax law. We have not entered a reservation here because that term would be used in Article 13 because of the anti-fragmentation rule. And then obviously if South Africa were ever to withdraw its reservations with respect to 12 and 14, that would be useful there. So it's there and available. We move on to improving dispute resolution. Up until now, we've been seeking to clamp down on tax planning that creates low or no taxation. Here we assist taxpayers who now find themselves in a position where there may in fact be double taxation because someone has perhaps inappropriately clamped down in one of the jurisdictions. So these are a set of measures to improve the dispute resolution system. And they're set out on the slide there. I don't think we should be going through that in any huge detail. Sorry, we need to move on the slides. Article 16, thank you. The one where we would propose to enter a reservation is with respect to Article 6.1. And the sting here is it says Article 16.1 allows for MAP to be submitted to either state. Now, the difficulty here is that you then have a situation where a South African taxpayer is submitting its MAP application to the other authority because, say, an associated enterprise in the other country has been taxed inappropriately. And then South Africa sort of is at the end of the chain. So if you wanted to do that, we would prefer you to lodge the application with South Africa, and then we will communicate with the other jurisdictions. So there's a consultation mechanism. And then that is the option we would propose so that at least we know what is happening with our taxpayers. The remainder of the article essentially just brings the older treaties into conformance with modern treaty practice. So I don't think we need to get into too much detail on that unless there are questions here. We can move on to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Corresponding adjustments. That is really just that is again bringing us up to modern standards in treaties. Essentially, if someone taxes a taxpayer on the one side and then increases the taxation, the question then is, well, what happens on the other side of that international tax transaction? Because if one jurisdiction is saying they want more tax because more profit should be there, well, logically, then that means there should be less profit in the other jurisdiction and it should reduce its tax. So that simply cleans up the text here and makes it always been the understanding from South Africa's point of view. Now we move on to the next slide. Arbitration. So South Africa proposes not to move into mandatory binding arbitration. And we share that position with very many other developing countries. South Africa's position, if you're aware of it in the trade space, is not to have arbitration in the International Trade Agreement, investment agreements. And so that is consistently done here as well. We do not elect for binding mandatory arbitration. Instead, we use what are known as the MAP procedures, the mutual agreement procedures, where the two tax authorities, or maybe more than two, depending on just how complex the arrangement is, would enter into discussions to best address the issue. But there is no binding arbitration in that process. And then we finally move on to the last set of provisions. And these really are these sort of more administrative provisions that deal with signature, ratification, reservations, and so on. This MLI is already in force because it required 5 signatories. As Younger has pointed out, there are many more signatories than that already. So it is already operational for the countries that have signed and ratified it. Sorry, I should have said more than 5 signed and ratified. And there are definitely substantially more than 5 in play at the moment. So MLI is operation. And essentially for South Africa, what we need to now do is ratify it and deposit it with the depository so that we can international agreements up to the modern standards and help clamp down on some of the base erosion and profit shifting we have been seeing. Just one last point, which isn't on the slides, but it speaks to something Younger mentioned a little earlier, is that the MLI sits and operates in conjunction with the existing treaties. So it doesn't specifically amend the treaties. So the treaty applies and then it's modified by this other agreement that sits next to it, which can be quite difficult for taxpayers and tax administrations to interpret. So the practice has arisen now to prepare what are known as synthesized texts, which essentially do the work of combining them so that taxpayers and tax administrations know what the end result is, so to say. And South Africa has been in the process of working with our treaty partners where the MLI will come into force, so that once it is ratified, we will be able to release a number of these synthesized texts to assist taxpayers and our colleagues in the interpretation of the end result. We have not been able to do that with all our treaty partners because a number of them are saying, well, we'd like you to finalize your ratification process so that we have a final agreement that we can look at from your perspective, and we will then give you priority in the process of developing synthesized text. But we have had a number of our fellow administrations that have been willing to engage with us prior to that, so that we will in fact have a fair number of these synthesized texts ready to go up as soon as the MLI comes into force for South Africa to assist both SARS and taxpayers. And I think that's it from my side. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, Franz and Younger, honorable members, over to you. Are there comments, questions? Noxie?
Hey, Chair, good morning. I can't lie, Chairperson. Sorry, you know, I am impressed by the presentation, but I need a lot of education on these issues. For example, Yanga is talking of BEPS and goes on to talk about BEPS MLI. For me, Yanga, you should start by explaining to me what BEPS is and therefore what BEPS MLI is. Because then you go on, Yanga goes on to say that South Africa is not part of G20. Oh, sorry, it's the only country in G20. Did you probably want to say it's the only African country in G20? I need more explanation on that. The other area for me is where you say there are companies that have dual residence, that is countries that reside in two countries, and that those countries have to sort out between themselves as to where this company can belong. I don't know, Yanga, but I would have thought that it should be the owners of the particular company to make a decision as to where they want residence for taxation purposes. Why should it be the countries that make that decision? Thank you, Chair. I'll pause there for now.
Of course, over to you, Franz and Younger.
Thank you, Chair, and want to apologize to the honorable members for not maybe explaining what is meant by BEPS. The base erosion and profit shifting, it is a project that came about after the 2008 financial crisis. So there was a 2008 financial crisis, and the G20 leaders or heads of state met, and then they find that out that multinationals are shifting funds from high tax jurisdictions to low tax jurisdictions. And it was found that a lot of money is being shifted to tax havens. And the reason why countries are not aware of that is because there is no proper exchange of information, because there'll be bank secrecy rules, there's this and that we wanted to find synchronized measures that are international standards that are aimed to stop this base erosion and profit shifting. As such, the BEPS project was formed by the G20 ministers. The importance of saying that South Africa is the only African country that is the member of G20 is that when we go to the G20, when we speak, because South Africa is the only African country, we don't speak only on our behalf, because we have to also represent other African countries that are not members of the G20. Even on the inclusive framework, when we speak as South Africa, we don't speak only on our behalf. Hence, we've got the African Tax Administration Forum. So before the meetings with the G20, before the meetings of the inclusive framework, we as African countries, we will meet. We will say, this is the South African position, but this is also the position of the other countries. And then what is the African position that we can take in this regard? For example, the common African position that France is whereby we don't, as developing countries, agree to mandatory binding arbitration. Because you'll find that when we go to the mandatory binding arbitration, the developed countries, because they've got resources and capabilities, they always win. So that is when we have this emphasis of saying South Africa is the only African country that is the member of the G20. We want to emphasize that when we go to those meetings, we don't only represent ourselves, we also represent other African countries. And then France can talk about dual residence. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Yanga. Thank you, Chair. That was an excellent question. So let's have a look at how the law generally works internationally when it comes to the residence of a company. Generally speaking, the first place a tax system looks as to where the company is resident is where the company is for. Well, our first assumption is that company is going to be resident in South Africa. Now, that's fine, but what you can have is a company then that is created somewhere else, but where it is managed in South Africa, where the actual control of the company is in South Africa. So then most tax systems will then also look to see where is the control, the ultimate board of directors, let's call it, control of this company is, because that may give you a sense of where the company really is resident. So then there is that as a test. And so what you can have is a situation where a company is created in one country, but then it is managed and controlled out of another country. So which of the two countries is where it is truly resident? Now, if you were to simply allow the owners of the company to decide that, well, then you would have the situation that a South African company could simply say, well, no, actually, I'm resident in a very low tax jurisdiction where there's a 0% income tax rate or a 5% income tax rate or what have you. And I'm not actually resident in South Africa, although the company was created in South Africa, its board of directors is in South Africa, its operations are in South Africa, but it is resident somewhere else. So I can see it as an attractive proposition, but the tax system says we need something a bit more objective than that. And that's why the concepts of where the company was created, where it's managed and controlled, and some other factors come into play. And because you have those factors coming into play, you then need some kind of a tiebreaker rule where two countries say, well, I think it's resident here. So, I mean, even if you did have a situation where a country said, well, the owners may elect where the company is resident, another country may disagree with that rule and say, no, our rule is something different. And you're still left with the situation of how do you break this viewpoint that the two countries have, with one saying it's resident here and the other one saying, no, it's resident there. So you still will need a tiebreaker no matter what the underlying rules are. And so what this tries to do is it tries to create that mechanism for the tiebreaker, which is the agreement between the two countries' competent authorities. Now, I suppose I should quickly stop and explain what a competent authority is, because, and that is the person who in the treaty is the representative of the country for tax agreement purposes. So in South Africa, it is the Commissioner for SARS. In other countries, it may be the Commissioner for their tax administration, it may be their minister, or it may be some other official. But essentially, that is a person who has been identified, who obviously then delegate to other people to do some of the work, to enter into these discussions and deal with these kinds of questions that come up, having the technical expertise to do that. The underlying reason why you have competent authorities is that otherwise the countries would probably have to do this through the diplomatic channels, which would be a much slower process. And you would then have to involve diplomats who may not be expert in tax issues, which would then complicate them further. So this allows the administrations or the policymakers to engage directly to come up with a result, which would probably be a bit quicker than trying to use the standard diplomatic channels. So I hope that helps.
Okay, thanks for the response. It looks like we're done with the presentations and the responses. We have to officially adopt the, what do we call them? The protocols. Can somebody move for the adoption of the amended protocol on the agreement between RSA and Kuwait? Any mover?
I move for the adoption, Chair.
Honorable Mavileta moves for the adoption. Second.
Seconded, Chair.
Noxie, second. Honorable Abra. The report, the BEPS.
I move for the adoption, Chair.
Honorable Mavileta moves for the adoption. Any second?
Seconded, Chairperson.
Honorable Mazet Nkomo, seconds. Then thanks very much. Let's move to, we're done with item 7 and then item 8. It looks like we're done with the agenda. We're coming to closure. Any announcement, Alan, before I close the meeting?
No, Chair, it's just the next meeting of the committee is on Tuesday. I will forward relevant documents sometime either today or tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, honorable members, for attending the meeting and deliberations. Thanks very much to National Treasury, led by the DG. Also in the meeting, also acknowledge SARS team. Thanks to the entire National Treasury team who assist in the platform. Okay. And then thank you to the entire parliamentary team, and in particular the support team of SCOF. Thanks very much. Until we meet again, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Amanda.
Recording stopped.
Yanga. Is Yanga gone, Chair?
No, see. Oh, I was switching off the, what you call, Tini?
Is Yanga gone?
Yes, she's gone.
She's gone. You know, Younger and the technology, not friends.
Because I was going to say, it sounds like she's a very important person in these international taxation structures. So, Franz, you must tell Yanga that when you go again, you must take the committee with you. You seem to be very important people in that structure.
Oh, you want to go to BEPS and protocols? There's lots
I want to take you with me, all of you, Chair.
Noxie, I have been involved. Remember, I'm a former minister. It's like you forget. So I know these bilaterals and multilaterals and hey. Oh. No,
So, I'm like, so when I speak, Chair, you see, I must speak for myself, maybe myself and Zanele.
Yeah, probably yourself and Zanele, not for me. I'm a former minister. I was involved in multilaterals and bilaterals agreement.
Long live.
Okay, Nox, I'm rushing to as into Zama preparation here, conferences, Zama region here, Gauteng.
Sure, Chair. Good luck.